Welcome back to Data Center News Asia. We are excited to be partnering with another new event in the industry. You've been watching our PTC content recently. We did some great stuff with the Tech Capital last year, Data Cloud, of course, W Media, and Data Center World. And now the eagle-eyed viewers would remember we did mention this event back at the Tech Capital Finance Forum. Dan Kesler did an interview with us, and he was talking about some of the exciting dynamics in Japan, power, etc. Uh, I apologize, I've got the name wrong already. Dan Cox was with us. Other Dan. We were just joking before we dived on about the double down situation. Dan Kester, welcome to the show.
Hey Rhys, hey James, great to be here.
Dan, we first met actually, I think it was Mark Smith's barbecue at PTC a couple of years ago, and you were working on various projects around Japan at the time. Tell us a little bit about Digital Garden. Give us the headlines of this event and why you started it up.
Yeah, so I've been in Japan working in the data center industry for some time, particularly on the real estate investment side, trying to build out a new hub here. And I think one of the things that we noticed through that process, right, working a lot with the players in Japan and also communicating with the industry globally, was that there was a lot of parties that should be communicating that are not communicating. And I think, on the global side, you hear a lot this narrative of Japan's really hard, we really want to be there, but it's very difficult. And then, ironically, domestically, when you talk to the players, both on the private side and the public side, because this includes government and local government, regional government, saying, hey, we really want to do more in the data center space and we want to bring more investments. Japan is, deeply underinvested from a digital infrastructure perspective, one fourth of the per capita capacity compared to the US, and that's pre-AI levels, and less total data centers than the Netherlands. And this is the fourth largest economy in the world, right? So I think what we really wanted to do as the Digital Garden platform was let's get everyone in the room, all the decision makers, a broad range of stakeholders, and really advance the industry forward here. So that's kind of the mission and why we set about doing this and went from real estate, private equity, and deals and investment to go and organizing a conference. It's really out of that mission.
And Dan, it sounds like you met Rhys at a party which I was at, but we only met much later, and have caught up a couple of times to kind of discuss what's happening in the kind of the broader Japanese market. For anyone who's not kind of across what's happening, the market is kind of dominated by Tokyo and Osaka, and we see a number of announcements, pretty a steady sort of flow of announcements coming out from both of those markets. But like for anyone who's not too familiar with the Japanese market, what's the situation there? Are there other markets outside of Tokyo and Osaka where development is happening or where development may happen in the future?
That's a great question, James. So Tokyo is the core market, right? One of the most important markets in Asia. And you kind of saw Osaka come come as the second region originally as a secondary backup and has really grown into be its own independent region. I think what you're seeing in Japan is the common complaint, I would say, that you hear a lot is the struggles around power availability and the timelines of 4 or 5, sometimes people getting quoted 8 to 10 years to power in those main locations. And so I think there's two things happening. One is the restrictions, right? But the second part is also the new use cases that are emerging, right? And so there is an opportunity to rethink the architecture here and say, what does this market look like given these new use cases and opportunities to think a little more creatively? And so I think what you're starting to see is a little bit of that. And I see the way that I explain it is I think there's three broad buckets. The first is what you call new clusters in existing regions, right? So you see people moving into within those same Tokyo Osaka regions, but stretching a little bit the traditional requirements that you had from a cloud perspective. That's where you see a project in Tsukuba, which is not, it's not within the exact range of where the definitions of AZs would be. It's a little bit farther away, but it's within that broader region, right? You saw a project from NTT announced in Tochigi now, and you'll see more of that, right, within those regions. That's one trend, right? The other trend that you'll see is this idea of new hubs, right, and moving away from those locations. Originally, there was this framework of having to establish a new region, you're seeing a precedent in the US of not having to do that, right? In use cases that are not necessarily only cloud, or there's some evolution there. That's where you start to see projects in Hokkaido, in Kyushu. You saw Google making an announcement in Hiroshima. It's not exactly clear what they're going to do there, but you're going to start to see that. And what's driving that is usually lower power costs, renewables availability, scale, real scale. We're talking, if you want to go and do 500 megawatts, gigawatt level scale, you start to look elsewhere. So the second trend is new hubs. And then I would say the third is what I call creative edge. So people doing creative stuff around the edge, repurposing office buildings, doing containers, doing all kinds of interesting stuff that's getting announced. And that's really around that very low latency type use cases that need to be in city. That's kind of what I'm seeing from the evolution and where things are going.
And just to kind of add to that, you mentioned, sorry, pick up on a point you made earlier about can't remember the exact phrase you used, but Japan being underinvested in from a digital infrastructure point of view. What, again, for someone who's not as familiar, or for people watching who aren't as familiar with the Japanese market, like what are the obstacles people face? Because I think people have this view of Japan being this very modern country and the latest and greatest of everything, but I think some of the obstacles are quite old fashioned in some ways. So what's the kind of the on the ground view of the obstacles there?
So the first thing I'll say, I'll talk a little bit about, they're all extremely solvable problems, right? These are not matters of physics that limit these. And the problems are, if you talk to the people in the industry, is one, the time to get to RFS, right? And that has several components. It's the difficulty in sourcing land, the availability of land, the time to power, and then the time to construction, right? It takes you 2.5 years to put a building up here, and in Johor you're doing it in 11 months, then that makes a difference, right? So there's all these set of problems around timelines, which are problematic. I'd say a big theme that you've heard a lot of is general contractor availability, right? And what you started to see now is a migration from the top GCs. There's 5 major GCs in Japan, and you're starting to see now some of what's called the second tier VCs starting to do projects. Now, keep in mind when we say second tier VCs, these GCs, these are general contractors that are building enormous projects. So they are very well capable of building data centers. And the third issue I would say is cost, right? If you look, Japan is still the most expensive place in the world to build data centers. Now, the flip side of this is these are all solvable problems, right? When you think about who has actually spent the time really to really innovate on designs here, right? To really bring those costs down. And the common excuse is, oh, there's seismic requirements, but the base isolation does not make the data center 2 times more expensive than elsewhere, right? So there's a huge opportunity here to, one, build at scale, right? To build more repeatable designs that lower cost, improve your procurement, purchasing power. Think about designs that are more creative, modular. And then on the site selection power side, being more creative in terms of the architecture, right? So better engagement between the end users and saying, where can we go where there actually is availability, there is power, where we can move faster, where we can get to large scale. So all these problems are addressable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dan. You mentioned there some of the demand drivers, things like AI and stuff coming to Japan. Japan obviously seems to have skipped some of the digital cloud revolution that's happened in Western countries, but most of the 20th century it was an infrastructure leader. We look at the trains, we look at the power stations, we look at the broader infrastructure capabilities in Japan. A lot of these problems you've outlined seem to be a communication gap or an issue between these foreign demand drivers and the local ability to execute in these countries. So the event comes on nicely to Digital Garden, bringing people together. One of the things that Dan Cox had me really fascinated about when he was talking about the event was how you're going to make this a bilingual event. Because a lot of these big Japanese contractors and experts, one of the challenges can be sometimes the language gap and dealing with foreign investors. How are you guys going to solve that and make this network work?
So as you said, the third co-founder of this initiative is a guy called Mike Owen, who is also the executive director of the Urban Land Institute. And he's actually done this for the real estate industry and brought really the international side and the Japanese side to really collaborate. And in the ULI events, it works great, right? There's simultaneous translation, and you have certain panels that are in Japanese, some that are in English, and everyone, it just works, right? I've attended them, and it works. And I think the reason for really, look, if it's only the international crowd coming to Japan, then we haven't solved anything, right? If it's only the Japanese getting together, and there are some industry events today that happen in Japan, but they're all only in Japanese, and so they're not accessible to the broader community to say, hey, we want to come and engage. So the secret is really in bringing them together, and I think that has been the most exciting part, right? And from the very beginning, to your point a little bit, Rhys, you talked a little bit about this conservative culture. It's a little bit different this time, and I sense it in Japan, where there's an urgency to act. Contrary to other locations around the world, the government is extremely supportive of digital infrastructure. If you actually pay attention, there's been some significant regulatory changes that allow you. I'll give you an example. There's, on the zoning perspective, there's accelerated processes now that allow data centers to be accelerated, land to be zoned for data centers in an accelerated way, in an equivalent way they would be for other critical infrastructure like hospitals. And so I think the idea of having government in the room, which is awesome, and MEDI will be there, and MLIT will be there, and the digital agency will be there, all these major bodies of government will be there, and then the Japanese private industry, which has a huge desire to be engaged in this, and then obviously the global players that bring a lot of that expertise and experience into the market.
Dan, sounds like I said, myself and Rhys are already convinced. We've already signed up. We have our tickets. We have flights booked, etc. And then we're both bringing colleagues along, so we will be there to support. But like, who are some of the kind of the key people outside of this attending the event? And for people, hopefully, some people are watching this and the event has grabbed their attention. How do they sign up?
So on our website, digitalgarden.co.jp, and we obviously are doing this for the industry. People are also interested in putting their name out there and sponsoring, supporting it. That's also an option. You can also contact us directly. My email, if you guys want to drop it later, happy to share it. If someone has any issues signing up, they can also reach out directly. We'll get them signed up. But really excited, I think, to have everyone here in Tokyo. And I think what we're seeing that's really, really cool is the seniority of the attendees and the diversity of the attendees in terms of, I'll give one example that I think is quite interesting. We had a conversation with an end user, a CTO of a technology company, and we were talking to him about his business and what are his priorities when he buys compute. He's doing a lot of stuff in AI, and his company is one of the largest technology companies in Japan. And he was saying, my key concern, number one concern, is actually business continuity. I am really scared that all my data is in Tokyo and in Osaka along the Nankai Trough. If there's a big earthquake, I want diversity. And so, right, most people engage with the hyperscalers directly, but if you actually talk to their major customers and you're hearing something like this, that gives you an interesting insight around what happens next. And so that diversity of people coming, and the fact that we have people like Koshizuka Sensei from Tokyo University, who's advising the government on their strategy for how to deploy digital infrastructure, that's a cool perspective that gives you a broader lens than the traditional just smaller circles of the data center industry that you typically see. So I think it's a really, really great forum for people to come to learn, to network, to get together, and to hopefully get deals done and collaborate to solve the problems that we talked about earlier.
Fantastic. And it looks like there should be some other networking events and other opportunities to get together around this. I see that you've just signed up the Women in Data Centers event to happen on the Tuesday afterwards. So I think AirTrunk is the main sponsor there, and James's colleague Haley and my colleague Nolan are running that along with Heather from Oracle. So it should be a good turnout for that. I mean, I know the Japanese data center industry is perhaps not the most gender progressive historically, but they're making good strides. Any other key events that we should highlight just quickly for people to look out for while they're in town?
No, come to Digital Garden. We have a big gala happening that first day. That'll be really fun. Some people have busy schedules, and We've heard some people are going to come in and out certain sessions. That's totally cool. We think that first day gala will be quite an amazing, I think, forum of getting ready to go. I definitely would not miss that one. And then obviously the Women in Data Centers initiative is an absolutely fantastic initiative that we're super, super happy that and very honored that Nomaloon partnered with us to do it alongside Digital Garden. So super exciting.
Thanks for coming on the show, Dan, and we'll be back with the news at the regular time tomorrow, I think.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dan. Look forward to seeing you in Tokyo.